The morning air was still, heavy with the scent of pine drifting through the open windows of the Vexmoor estate. An aging, ivy-wrapped home nestled deep in the Appalachian hills of Virginia. Sterling Vexmoor stood barefoot in the sunroom, her coffee untouched, watching in stunned silence as Valko, her retired K9 German shepherd, barked wildly at the bookshelf. His growl was low, guttural, almost like he was warning something inside the walls to stay down. Sterling had only been back for 3 months. After her father, Creed Ashvale, passed under strange circumstances, she returned to the ancestral home to settle his affairs. It should have been simple, but nothing ever was in the Ashvale bloodline. Valko had been gifted to her by one of Creed's oldest friends, Boon, a quiet man with eyes like burned glass. He'd said only one thing as he handed over the leash. "He'll find what needs to be found." Valko's barking reached a fever pitch, and then, just as Sterling stepped closer, he began clawing at the lower shelf. Dust and old paper flew into the air. Her fingers reached toward the chaos, brushing against something odd. A vertical seam in the wood. She paused, pressed. A faint click echoed through the room, and a narrow panel creaked open with reluctant groaning, like it hadn't seen daylight in decades. Inside was a rusted metal box. Small, heavy, unlabeled. Valko immediately stopped barking and sat, staring at her, his breath slow and controlled. Sterling lifted the box with both hands, heart pounding. She hadn't believed in hidden truths, but this felt different, sacred almost. She carried it to the kitchen table and slowly opened the lid, revealing photographs, brittle papers, and a folded letter sealed in wax. The photos were black and white. One showed a younger Creed Ashvale beside a woman Sterling didn't recognize, her beauty soft, timeless, wearing a delicate cross. Another figure stood just outside the frame, Thorn Dustwalker, a name she had only heard whispered late at night, when her father drank too much. Beneath the pictures was a letter, addressed in a familiar, slanted hand. "For my daughter, when the silence is no longer safe." Sterling's breath caught. Valko let out a soft whine. Something about this moment felt like the start of something irreversible. She didn't know what her father had buried, or why Valko had known exactly where to find it, but she could feel it now in her bones. This house had kept secrets, and one of them had just started to rise from the dust. Sterling hesitated as her fingers hovered over the wax seal. The room was quiet now. So quiet she could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock and the soft, rhythmic breath of Valko at her feet. The seal cracked easily under pressure, and as she unfolded the aged letter, the scent of time hit her like dust rising from a crypt. Her father's handwriting flowed across the page in a style she hadn't seen since childhood. Elegant, controlled, and strangely haunted. "If you're reading this, it means I failed to outrun the truth. I thought burying it would protect everyone. But lies grow teeth when they're kept underground too long. What happened in the summer of '72 was not an accident. And it didn't end when they closed the file. It ended in blood. My blood. Maybe yours too." Sterling's hands trembled as she read. Each line pulled her deeper into a version of her father she had never known. A man haunted not by war or regret, but by a singular event. The name Helen appeared next, followed by Jet Ironvale, and that was when her stomach sank. She knew that name. Jet had been a deputy back in the '70s, a decorated officer who vanished without explanation. No body, no funeral, just silence. Creed had spoken of him once, late at night after 2 bourbons. Some people disappear not because they ran, but because someone made sure they'd never talk again. As she finished the letter, the last line hit her like a punch to the ribs. "Valko knows where to go. Trust the dog. He was trained by Blood Trail. Weston Blood Trail." The name exploded like a buried mine in her memory. He'd been the lead K9 handler during the Cold Ridge operations, a program the locals still called the cleanup. No one talked about it anymore. Too many names, too many closed doors. But if Blood Trail had trained Valko, then Creed had planned this. Her father hadn't just left behind a mess, he'd left behind a map. And the dog was the compass. Valko stood, eyes fixed on the back window, tail stiff, ears up. He took a step toward the hallway, paused, then looked back at her. Sterling followed instinct more than reason. She grabbed a flashlight and an old coat from the back of the chair and followed the dog down the narrow hallway toward the cellar door. Creaked open like something alive. Cold air met her face, damp, metallic and ancient. Whatever Creed Ashvale had tried to hide was waiting below. And Valko was ready to lead her straight to it. The first step into the cellar felt like stepping into another decade. The air was thick, damp with mildew and memory. Each footfall echoed off stone walls that had seen too much and told too little. Sterling held the flashlight high, casting shaky light over crates, rusted tools, and forgotten furniture. Valko descended without hesitation, his movements precise, guided by something deeper than instinct. He paused at the far end, nose pressed to a stack of rotting boards beneath a tarp. Sterling peeled the tarp away, revealing a patch of concrete slightly discolored from the rest. Her breath caught. Someone had poured a new slab over something older, recent enough to still carry faint tool marks. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't some old repair. This was concealment. She crouched down, running her fingers across the cool surface. The letter had warned her. Valko would lead the way, but it was her hands that would have to uncover what had been buried. With effort, she found a crowbar among the clutter and began prying at the edge of the slab. Every scrape sent a chill up her spine. Valko watched silently, ears alert. Finally, a sharp crack split the silence. The concrete gave way, and a narrow wooden box, long and weathered, became visible beneath the broken shell. Sterling froze. It wasn't a toolbox. It wasn't storage. It was a coffin. Her throat tightened. This couldn't be happening. She stood frozen for a long moment before forcing herself to lift the lid. Inside was a body skeletal wrapped in aged cloth. No name, no identification, just bones and silence. But tucked beside the ribcage, barely visible in the flashlight's beam, was a small metal badge, blackened with time. She reached for it slowly. Raventhorne County Sheriff's Department. Her voice caught in her throat. The initials were faint but still there. J.I. Jet Ironvale. She staggered back. This was the man who had vanished in 1972, the man Creed had mentioned in whispers, and he'd been buried, literally, beneath the house she grew up in. Her mind reeled. Why had her father done this? Had he killed Jet? Or tried to protect him from something worse? She thought about the woman in the photo, Helen, and the missing years, the lies. Sterling turned to Valko, whose eyes met hers with eerie clarity. The past wasn't resting, it had only been waiting. And now that it had been unearthed, there was no escaping what came next. Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried. Sterling sat at the kitchen table, her hands stained with dust and concrete. The sheriff's badge resting before her like a relic from a war no one had admitted ever happened. The house was quiet again, too quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and Valko's steady breathing at her side. Her mind spun. If that was truly Jet Ironvale's body beneath the cellar, then every story her father ever told or avoided telling was a lie. And not just a lie, a cover-up. She picked up the badge again, turning it over slowly. The metal was cold, its weight far heavier than it should have been. A memory flickered. Her father, Creed Ashvale, in the den, flipping through an old box of case files when he thought she was asleep. He had stopped on one folder, stared for a long time, then burned it in the fireplace without saying a word. That had been almost 20 years ago. She never asked what was inside. Now she wished she had. Sterling didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she drove to the edge of Hollow Ridge to find Boon. His cabin was exactly as she remembered, tucked into the tree line like it had grown from the earth. Boon answered the door in silence, his sharp eyes narrowing when he saw Valko. "You found it," he muttered. Not a question but a resignation. Sterling held up the badge. Boon's jaw clenched. "I told him it wouldn't stay buried. Not forever." "Was it my father?" she asked, her voice brittle. Boon didn't answer immediately. He stepped back, letting her in, then closed the door behind her with a thud that seemed to echo off every wall. The cabin was filled with old photos, clippings, and maps, like a war bunker frozen in time. Boon sat across from her, rubbing a scar on his wrist. Creed didn't kill Jet, he said finally. He tried to save him. But once Blood Trail got involved, there was no saving anyone. Weston Blood Trail. The name again, slicing through the room like a knife. Sterling had only heard it whispered, part legend, part nightmare. An ex-Special Forces operator turned enforcer during Cold Ridge's darkest chapter. He had trained Valko, and apparently silenced more than one voice in the process. Why would Blood Trail kill a sheriff? She asked. Boon looked her dead in the eye. Because Jet knew what happened to Helen. Sterling's chest tightened. The woman in the photo. The one who had never been named. Boon leaned forward, lowering his voice. She wasn't just someone Creed loved. She was someone Blood Trail needed erased. And now, with Valko leading the way, her father's lies were unraveling, one corpse at a time. Sterling stared at Boon, her voice barely more than a whisper. Who was Helen? Boon stood slowly, walking toward an old chest near the fireplace. He opened it with care, as if touching a wound. From inside, he pulled out a yellowed manila folder, labeled only with one word, Raven Thorn. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward her. Inside were photos, transcripts, and a birth certificate worn soft from decades of hiding. At the top was a name that made Sterling's breath hitch. Helen Grace Hollowridge. Your father was supposed to protect her, Boon said. But he was too late. By the time Creed found out what Blood Trail was doing, she was already gone. Sterling's hands trembled as she turned over a photograph of Helen at age 22. Smiling, radiant, and visibly pregnant. The back of the photo was scrawled with a date, July 1972. The same month Jet Ironvale disappeared. And suddenly the pieces started to move. You're telling me, she began, but Boon nodded before she could finish. Jet was the father. Creed tried to help them disappear. But someone higher up wanted Helen silenced. And when Jet tried to go public with what he knew, Blood Trail made sure that never happened. Sterling's mind reeled. This wasn't just a love triangle gone wrong. It was a cover-up, a cleansing, a disappearance ordered and carried out by men with badges. Who gave the order? She asked. Boon hesitated. That's the part Creed never figured out. But someone powerful enough to bury a sheriff under concrete and make the town forget. That takes more than a man. That takes a system. Valko let out a low growl, as if sensing the shift in the air. Boon looked down at the dog and added, he was trained to track more than people. He can smell guilt, fear, and he remembers faces. Sterling stood, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions. Anger, sorrow, disbelief. Her father hadn't been the man she thought, but maybe he had tried to do the right thing. In the only way he knew how. So what happened to Helen? She asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Boon's eyes darkened. Some say she died in the woods. Others say she was taken somewhere off-grid. Creed always believed she was still out there, hiding, waiting for someone to finish what he couldn't. Sterling looked down at Valko, who had risen to his feet again, eyes locked on the cabin door. She felt it in her chest, like the air had shifted. Something out there was waiting, and Valko was ready to find it. The trail began behind Boon's cabin, winding through thick underbrush that hadn't seen footsteps in decades. Valko led with unwavering purpose, nose low, tail rigid, body tense like a wire ready to snap. Sterling followed, her boots crunching over dead leaves, heart pounding louder than the wind above the tree line. The folder Boon had given her was tucked in her jacket, along with the photo of Helen and Jet. There was something about Helen's eyes in that image, soft, but not afraid, like she knew what was coming. They reached an old logging road, barely visible now under moss and rot. This used to lead to Cold Ridge Sector 9, Boon had said before she left. That's where they took people when they didn't want them found. Sterling had heard the stories growing up about the old government installations hidden in the woods. Some said they were abandoned labs. Others swore they were prisons for people who knew too much. None of it ever confirmed. all of it whispered. As Valko sniffed along the edge of the trail, he paused, ears twitching. Then he veered off into the trees, forcing Sterling to duck under branches and push through thick vines. After about 20 minutes, the forest broke open into a clearing choked with rusted chain-link fencing and collapsed guard posts. A weathered sign lay on its side, barely legible under years of grime. U.S. property, no trespassing, Sector 9. Her breath caught. It was real. The air was different here, still, pressured, like the ground was holding its breath. Valko led her around the collapsed fence to an overgrown service tunnel barely visible beneath the ivy. The door had once been locked, but time and rust had broken the metal's will. Sterling pulled it open with effort, the groan echoing into blackness. Valko didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, swallowed by shadow. Sterling clicked on her flashlight and followed. The tunnel smelled of rot and earth, but beneath it was something else. Formaldehyde? Bleach? She couldn't place it. The walls were lined with pipes and abandoned light fixtures, most shattered. And then, after a dozen yards, they reached it. A heavy steel door with a faded red handprint on it. Fresh scratches marked the floor in front of it. Recent. Sterling knelt and touched them. Human. Someone had been here. Not long ago. Valko growled low, almost under his breath. Whatever Creed Ashvale had feared, whatever Helen Grace had been running from, it was behind that door. And now so were they. Sterling's hand hovered over the rusted handle of the steel door. The faded red handprint, smeared and cracked, looked almost like dried blood in the beam of her flashlight. Valko stood perfectly still beside her, eyes locked on the door, not barking, just breathing heavy. She could feel it too. Something was inside. Not just a secret, but a presence. Not alive maybe, but not entirely gone either. She gripped the handle and pulled. The door groaned open, slow and angry, revealing the hollow belly of Cold Ridge Sector 9. The air inside was thick and heavy with chemical rot. The tunnel expanded into a larger chamber, lit only by cracks in the ceiling where shafts of pale daylight leaked in. Metal gurneys lined the walls, overturned or rusting in place. Faded files and clipboards lay scattered on the floor like the aftermath of a storm. Sterling stepped carefully, each footfall echoing in the silence. Valko moved ahead, nose twitching, drawing toward the far wall where an old observation window looked down into a lower room. She approached and looked through the glass. Her heart stopped. Below, lying motionless on a cot surrounded by collapsed file cabinets and broken equipment, was a woman. Elderly, thin, but unmistakably the same woman from the photo. Helen Grace Hollowridge. Alive. Sterling gasped. She scrambled to the nearby stairs, ignoring the warnings in her mind. Valko barked sharply as if to urge her forward but also warn her to stay alert. She reached the bottom and rushed to the cot. Helen's skin was pale and drawn, but her chest rose and fell, slow and deliberate. Sterling dropped to her knees beside her, gently touching her arm. Helen stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Blue eyes, faded but defiant, met Sterling's. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Helen whispered, "You look like your father." Sterling couldn't move, couldn't speak. The woman presumed dead for 50 years had just looked into her eyes and called her by blood. "Why are you here?" Sterling finally managed. Helen coughed, then whispered, "Because they needed me to disappear. But I didn't want to die. Not until someone remembered." Footsteps echoed behind them. Sterling stood, flashlight raised, heart pounding. Valko growled deeply now, teeth bared, facing the stairs. A figure was emerging from the shadows, tall, broad, deliberate in every step. The man's voice came low and cold. "You should have stayed out of this, Sterling." It was Slade Brimstone, and he was holding a gun. Slade Brimstone stepped fully into the dim light, his face gaunt, his eyes cold and unblinking. The pistol in his hand didn't waver. "You were never supposed to find her," he said, voice steady like a man who had waited years for this moment. "Your father made a mistake trusting you. He thought you'd stay quiet, but you had to go digging." Valko stood in front of Sterling, muscles tense, hackles raised, low growl vibrating in his chest. He wasn't attacking yet. He was waiting. Sterling's hands trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "Why is she here, Slade? Why didn't you kill her like the others?" His eyes flicked to Helen, still lying weakly on the cot, her breath shallow. "Because she was useful," he said flatly. "And dangerous. You don't kill a secret like Helen, you lock it up. You keep her breathing just enough to keep the story from surfacing. As long as she's down here, the past stays buried." Sterling took a step forward, slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You were part of it all, weren't you? Sector 9, the cover-ups, Jet Ironvale's murder." Brimstone's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I was order. I was control. You think your father was some kind of hero? He was one bad day away from being just like me. The only difference is, I didn't lie to myself about what I was doing." Helen spoke then, her voice rasping through the silence. "You took everything from me, Slade. My child. My life. My name." Sterling turned to her, stunned. "Your child?" Helen nodded weakly. "They took the baby. Said it had to disappear too. Said none of us could exist after what we saw." Her voice cracked. "I never even held her." A sound deep guttural rose from Valko. It wasn't just a growl now. It was something more primal. Protective. Dangerous. Brimstone raised his gun slightly. "You take one more step, and the dog dies first." Sterling didn't move, but her eyes scanned the room. Behind Brimstone, a row of shelves held broken equipment, and above them, a rusted emergency lever. She had one chance. "You're wrong about my father," she said, stalling. "He didn't try to forget. He died trying to finish what he started." Brimstone scoffed. "He died because he remembered." Sterling moved fast. In a single breath, she dove toward the wall, slamming the emergency lever down. Sparks flew, alarms shrieked, and overhead lights sputtered to life. Brimstone flinched. That was all Valko needed. With a snarl, Valko lunged. Valko hit Slade Brimstone like a force of nature. The gun fired once, wild and aimless, ricocheting off the wall before clattering to the floor. Slade crashed backward into the shelving unit, sending broken equipment crashing around him. Sterling rushed to Helen, shielding her as sparks rained from above. Valko held Brimstone pinned, teeth bared inches from his throat. The enforcer's bravado cracked for the first time. His hands frozen, eyes wide. "Call him off," he barked. Sterling didn't move. "You held her prisoner," she said, voice shaking. "You buried Jet. You destroyed families." Brimstone spat blood and hatred. "We preserved order. You think this town would have survived the truth? We were the dam holding back the flood." Sterling stepped closer, flashlight trembling in her hand. "That flood's coming now, Slade, and no one's going to stop it this time." Brimstone looked at Valko, then at Sterling. "You don't know what this is really about. You think it ends with me?" Sterling's breath caught. Something in his tone chilled her deeper than the cold stone floor beneath her boots. "Who gave the orders?" she asked. "Who let this happen?" Slade's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a curse. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but it's all in Sector 9's archive. Left wall. Behind the false panel." He coughed. "I was the sword girl, not the hand that swung it." Sterling turned to look at the wall of files. A faint seam ran along one section, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. She pulled at it, revealing a metal box bolted into the wall. Inside were folders, microfilm, and a sealed envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. "To Sterling, in case I fail, CA." Her father's initials. Her fingers trembled as she took the envelope and tucked it into her jacket. Behind her, Valko stepped away. Brimstone collapsed forward, groaning. His strength had faded. Whatever power he once held was gone. Helen, from the cot, whispered, "You've done what I couldn't. You found me." Tears lined her eyes. "Does that mean my child?" Sterling knelt beside her, voice gentle. "They took her, but I can find out what happened. I swear it." Helen closed her eyes, tears falling. For the first time in 50 years, the silence around her cracked. And inside it, hope. From above, a faint rumble echoed through the tunnels. Someone had triggered the alarm's topside. Maybe Boon. Maybe someone worse. Valko looked up, ears alert. They weren't alone anymore, and the final truth was waiting just outside the door. The daylight hit her face like a rebirth. Sterling emerged from the tunnel, blinking against the brightness. Valko close behind her and Helen supported gently under one arm. Boon was waiting at the tree line with his truck, engine running. His eyes widened when he saw Helen. Fragile, breathing, alive. After all this time, he muttered, voice cracking. She made it. Sterling didn't answer. She helped Helen into the back seat, then slid into the passenger side, her father's final letter still clutched in her coat. As the truck bounced along the dirt road back toward Hollow Ridge, Sterling finally opened the envelope. Her father's handwriting filled the page, shaky but clear. If you've found Helen, then you've already seen too much. I was a coward for hiding the truth, but I was trying to keep you safe. You were just a child when they took her baby. I didn't know until it was too late, but I did find something, a name, Weston Vexmoor. He signed the order to erase them. He made it all vanish, and he's still out there. Sterling's blood turned cold. Vexmoor. It was her mother's maiden name, her grandfather's name, the man whose picture still hung in the courthouse downtown, hailed as one of Raventhorn County's founding pillars. The truth wasn't just buried beneath concrete and silence. It was rooted in her bloodline. Her family wasn't just on the wrong side of history. It had written it. They arrived at Boon's cabin as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Authorities responding to the triggered alarms at Sector 9. Sterling knew she would have to speak to them, tell them everything. But not yet. First, she helped Helen onto the porch and wrapped her in a blanket. The older woman clutched Sterling's hand with surprising strength. "You're not like the others," she said. "You came looking when everyone else stopped." Sterling didn't know how to respond. So much had been taken, her father, her beliefs, the simplicity of her childhood. But something else had been returned, the truth, and in its place a responsibility. She looked at Valko, sitting calmly by her side. The dog had guided her not just through tunnels and secrets, but into the shadowed heart of her own family. Later that night, she stood alone by the fireplace, reading the rest of her father's letter. It ended with one sentence. "What you do with this truth is your own legacy now." Sterling folded the letter and stared into the flames. And for the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was.